While steel from machine guns tore through the map of Europe, an invisible mechanism of logistics and influence ensured that human thirst would be monetized on both sides of the trenches. At the height of the Second World War, logistical chaos and commercial embargoes were not obstacles, but catalysts for an empire that transformed patriotism into commodity and scarcity into radical innovation. While nations bled, the architecture of consumption adapted to guarantee that profit would flow regardless of which flag was raised at the front. You are on War Profits, where we uncover how war became business. The year is 1941. The world is splitting along ideological fault lines so deep that families are torn apart, cities reduced to ash, and entire populations mobilized for industrial slaughter. In this environment, one might assume that commerce stops, that the mechanisms of peacetime capitalism freeze under the weight of total war. But this assumption reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how power operates in the modern age. War does not interrupt commerce. War is commerce, and no entity understood this better than a syrup company from Atlanta, Georgia. Before the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, before the gas chambers were built at Auschwitz, before the beaches of Normandy ran red, there existed a product that had already colonized the American psyche. It was not a weapon, it was not a vehicle, it was a beverage, dark and sweet, sold in contoured glass bottles that fit perfectly in a soldier's hand. By the late 1930s, Coca-Cola had achieved something remarkable. It had become synonymous with a way of life. To drink Coca-Cola was to participate in American optimism, to taste modernity itself. The company had spent decades and millions of dollars ensuring that its product was not merely consumed, but woven into the fabric of identity. But identity, like everything else, becomes weaponized in wartime. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, the Coca-Cola Company faced a crisis that would have crippled lesser enterprises. Sugar, the lifeblood of their product, was immediately rationed. Factories were repurposed for munitions. Transportation networks prioritized military cargo. The entire infrastructure of American capitalism was being reorganized around a single objective: victory. For most companies, this meant contraction, sacrifice, and waiting for peace. For Coca-Cola, it meant the opportunity of a century. The architect of this transformation was a man named Robert Woodruff, the company's president, and a master of what we might call strategic patriotism. Woodruff understood something profound about the psychology of war. Soldiers do not fight for abstractions, they fight for home. And home, in the American imagination, was increasingly defined by the products they consumed. A Coca-Cola was not just a drink. It was a portal back to Main Street, to soda fountains, to normalcy. Woodruff saw that if he could position his product as essential to morale, he could transform a luxury good into a military necessity. In December 1941, just days after Pearl Harbor,
Woodruff issued a directive that would define the company's war strategy. He declared that every man in uniform would be able to buy a Coca-Cola for 5 cents, regardless of what it cost the company to produce and deliver it. This was not charity. This was genius. By framing the product as a patriotic right rather than a commercial transaction, Woodruff ensured that the United States government would subsidize the entire operation. And subsidize it they did. The military establishment, convinced that morale was as important as ammunition, granted Coca-Cola extraordinary privileges. The company was exempted from sugar rationing for products destined for the armed forces. They were given priority access to transportation networks. Most remarkably, they were allowed to send their own employees, dressed in modified military uniforms and given the unofficial title of technical observers, into combat zones to set up bottling plants. These men, who became known colloquially as Coca-Cola colonels, were not soldiers. They were corporate operatives embedded within the military structure, ensuring that the machinery of profit continued to turn, even as the machinery of war consumed millions of lives. By the end of the war, Coca-Cola had established 64 bottling plants in combat zones across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. These were not makeshift operations. They were fully functional factories, built with military resources, staffed by military personnel, and protected by military force. The company produced more than 5 billion servings of Coca-Cola for American troops during the war years.
5 billion moments of branded comfort, each one reinforcing the idea that American identity was inseparable from American products. But this is only half the story. Because while Coca-Cola was wrapping itself in the American flag, it was also operating in the heart of the Third Reich. Before the war, Coca-Cola had aggressively expanded into Germany, establishing a robust subsidiary called Coca-Cola GmbH. By 1939, Germany was the company's most profitable foreign market, with over 40 bottling plants and annual sales in the hundreds of millions of bottles. The man running this operation was Max Keith, a German national and fervent company loyalist, who had built the business through a combination of marketing savvy and political pragmatism.
When war broke out and communication between Atlanta and Berlin became impossible, Keith faced a choice: shut down operations or find a way to continue without American oversight or supplies. He chose to continue. With the United States entering the war and trade between the two nations severed, Keith could no longer import Coca-Cola syrup or any of its ingredients. Sugar was rationed, caffeine was unavailable. The formula itself was locked in an Atlanta vault. A rational business would have closed, but Keith was not interested in rationality. He was interested in survival. And so, in 1940, he improvised. Using whatever was available in wartime Germany, leftover fruit scraps, whey from cheese production, apple pomace, beet sugar, Keith created a new beverage.
It was orange-flavored, vaguely sweet, and bore no resemblance to Coca-Cola. But it could be bottled using the same infrastructure, sold through the same distribution networks, and marketed under the same corporate umbrella. He called it Fanta, derived from the German word Fantasie, because in a time of scarcity, imagination was the only abundant resource. Fanta was not a side project. It became the primary product of Coca-Cola GmbH during the war years. The drink was marketed at Nazi rallies, sold to the Wehrmacht, and consumed by German civilians as a small comfort in an increasingly desperate regime. The profits from Fanta kept the German subsidiary solvent, the factories operational, and the workforce employed. And when the war ended, when the Allies occupied Germany and the corporate veil was lifted, those profits flowed back to Atlanta.
This is where the moral architecture of the story collapses into ambiguity. On one side of the Atlantic, Coca-Cola was the taste of freedom, the liquid embodiment of American values, subsidized by taxpayers and celebrated in propaganda. On the other side, it was a corporation operating under a genocidal regime, adapting its product line to serve a war machine built on slave labor and extermination. The same company, the same shareholders, the same ultimate beneficiaries. The defense, when it came, was predictable. Coca-Cola executives in Atlanta claimed they had no control over the German subsidiary during the war. Max Keith, they argued, was acting independently, cut off from corporate oversight. The creation of Fanta was a survival tactic, not a collaboration. And technically, this was true.
Communication was severed. Orders could not be given or received. But this defense ignores a fundamental reality. The infrastructure that allowed Keith to operate was built with American capital, American expertise, and American branding. The factories, the distribution networks, the marketing strategies, all of it was a legacy of pre-war investment. Coca-Cola GmbH did not emerge spontaneously. It was cultivated, nurtured, and designed to be resilient. And resilience, in wartime, means complicity. Consider the workers who bottled Fanta in those German plants. Many of them were forced laborers, prisoners of war, or concentration camp inmates, leased to private companies by the Nazi state. This was standard practice across German industry. Companies like IG Farben, Siemens, and Volkswagen built entire production lines staffed by enslaved people. There is no evidence that Coca-Cola GmbH directly employed concentration camp labor, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The records are incomplete, the investigations were limited, and the incentive to obscure such connections was immense. What we do know is this: Coca-Cola GmbH remained profitable throughout the war. It paid taxes to the Nazi government, it participated in the wartime economy, and when the war ended, it was reintegrated into the global Coca-Cola system without consequence, without investigation, without accountability. The post-war period revealed the true genius of the system. While other companies faced scrutiny, trials, and forced reparations, Coca-Cola emerged not only unscathed, but strengthened. The 64 military bottling plants built during the war became the foundation for post-war expansion. The brand loyalty cultivated among soldiers translated into lifelong customers. The infrastructure, the distribution networks, the marketing expertise, all of it was repurposed for peacetime dominance. And Fanta, the drink, born of necessity in Nazi Germany, was not discarded. It was rebranded, reformulated, and relaunched as a global product. Today, Fanta is sold in over 180 countries, generating billions of dollars in annual revenue. Its origins are rarely mentioned. Its history is sanitized. The orange soda you buy at a convenience store carries within it the ghost of a wartime compromise, a reminder that profit does not require moral clarity. This is the lesson of Coca-Cola in World War II. The company did not cause the war, it did not design the Holocaust, it did not fire a single shot, but it understood.
With ruthless precision, that war creates opportunities for those willing to navigate the moral gray zones. By positioning itself as essential to both American morale and German resilience, Coca-Cola ensured that no matter who won, the company would profit. The war ended. The profits did not. What remains is a question that extends far beyond a single company or a single conflict. How do we reconcile the products we consume with the systems that produce them? How do we hold corporations accountable when their operations span borders, ideologies, and moral frameworks? And what does it mean when the taste of freedom and the taste of fascism are manufactured by the same hands? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the architecture of the modern world.
Because the mechanisms that allowed Coca-Cola to thrive during World War II, the subsidies, the exemptions, the embedding of corporate interests within military operations, did not disappear in 1945. They evolved. They became normalized. They became the blueprint for how capitalism operates in times of crisis. Today, defense contractors build schools in war zones. Tech companies provide surveillance tools to authoritarian regimes. Pharmaceutical giants patent life-saving drugs, while millions die from preventable diseases. The language has changed. The branding is more sophisticated, but the underlying logic remains the same. Profit is neutral, and neutrality is profitable. Coca-Cola's war was not an aberration, it was a prototype. If this story disturbs you,
if it challenges the narratives you were taught about the good war and the companies that supported it, then it has done its job. History is not a collection of heroes and villains. It is a record of systems, incentives, and the choices people make when those incentives align with power. Subscribe to War Profits, share this video, and ask yourself, what am I consuming, and what system am I feeding? The war ended. The bottles kept moving. And somewhere in a vault in Atlanta, the formula remains a secret.